This is Critical Nonsense, our high-lowbrow show about culture, science, and tech. This week, Joey asks us about magic battling tech, and I ask everyone about ghost foods.
Woo! Josh Groban. This is what a Joey sounds like.
I don't get it.
I'm sorry. This is what Aaron laughs like. It's so random. I like that. That's all I got.
And this is what an executive producer and Michael Bublé touring musician Jess Vander sounds like.
Hi, this is Jess. You could have left it at just Michael Bublé, but then I became the ensemble.
I mean, I did hear what's the movie Almost Famous? They're releasing a 103 song compilation of the movie, like for all the soundtrack from the movie, and I feel like Jess is just the Michael Bublé roadie version of Almost Famous. That's where I'm going with this. Yeah. That's what I understand from all of this.
Yeah, I was gonna say roadie or just Michael Bublé, and then touring musician just came in. But the thing is, I could see you at a Michael Bublé concert.
Yeah,
you already know all the songs. You gotta love his modern croon. I'm a big Michael Bublé fan. So is the Abu.
Nice.
See, this is why I knew it. I knew it without knowing it. It's like I know it. I don't need to know it because I know it. Like yes. You're the type of person who I feel like could deeply appreciate a glittery tuxedo.
Oh my goodness. Speaking of glittery tuxedos, I need to do some dry cleaning because we also have some housekeeping right now. What sort of housekeeping do we have this week, y'all?
Rate, review, subscribe. Jess did it, said it, won't take it back. Tell a friend, sign up for our newsletter, Progress Report. It is fun. It has actionable inspiration. People love it. You should download it with your email. Do people do that?
Indeed, yeah. Yep.
Jess hates it.
I co-sign. Jess,
where can people download with their email the Progress Report newsletter?
What? Download with their email?
Ooh,
what has this devolved into?
Critical Nonsense at sylvanelabs.com. Nope. We haven't had that email in a while. This is going to get cut out.
Progress by sylvane.co.
There we go.
Progress Report. That's it. Our house is clean. I actually just messed it up a lot. I made it dirtier in the process of cleaning it, and I don't care.
I'm leaving all the glitter on my tux with it. It's okay. It's all right.
Bless this mess.
It's the out stages, you know? You know the out stages?
What are
it's those? Like when everything has to be messy, you have to take everything out of the drawers, whatever, and then you clean them, and then you put them away.
Nice.
But it gets messier before it gets clean.
Oh, man, that's nice. That's nice.
I'm wearing white pants, so I'm messy. It's not Memorial Day yet, and I'm wearing white pants, and I don't care. I'm messy. Guys, girls, people, I'm fucking it up. I'm already messy again. Y'all.
I know. Can we start from the beginning?
Yeah. I've wanted to talk to you about this for some time.
Months.
True.
It is. In some ways, this is airing my dirty laundry because I'm about to tell you a number of shows that I've been watching. And I know Aaron has at least watched some of these shows.
Oh, yes.
This year.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a number of shows, and I know that this probably won't even be all of the ones that I've been watching, but there's a specific moment that I think that we're in that is very much around sort of magic fighting against technology. So I'm going to list the shows right now. There is the Winx Saga, which was an Italian cartoon turned into a Nickelodeon cartoon, turned into a Netflix series about real-life fairies that are going to an academy to learn about their magic. It's basically Harry Potter with fairies. Aaron and I watched it. We texted.
We did.
You didn't invite me.
I'm sorry, Jess. I'm very sorry.
There is the Nevers, which is a Victorian era like crime magic show about aliens coming and people get special powers at like the turn of sort of massive modernization of culture. There was the Irregulars, which was a future spinoff in the Sherlock Holmes universe, in which there are some young street urchins with magic, also on Netflix. And then there was Shadow and Bone, which was a Netflix series based on some books in which people are born with special powers that they tend to get sometime around puberty. And those special powers allow them to control things like read people's hearts or control fire or air or darkness or light. But all of these shows and more, I also watched The Legend of Korra, which we never discussed the fact that there is a queer love story at the end of the show, and no one had ever told me that. And I was like so excited at the end of the show that happened that way. But all of these shows are about people having magical powers that are also simultaneously like dealing with the pains of the emergence of technology in sort of like primitive cultural moments, with the primitive cultural moment exception being the Winx Saga. And so my question to you is, why are we gravitating towards magic now against technology? And is magic winning the fight against technology in the cultural conversation?
Okay, so the first time that we've talked about this in the past, I remember having a very, very spicy response that was in my head because I never shared it out loud. And what I struggled with is the fact that fantasy and magic in media have been major topics for a long time, like Charmed, Teen Wolf, that show that Sean Hayes used to be the executive producer of, that had to do with like fairy tales that overlapped with Manhattan and stuff. So anyway, I was like, yo, there've been tons of shows that deal with fantasy and magic. What are you talking about? This isn't a thing. However, it's not about fantasy and magic. It's about fantasy and magic versus technology. It's about where those two things intersect. And that is a thing that's happening more right now. Like, I do think that there is an element of, I mean, I got a lot of opinions about this, and I think it's definitely inspired or pushed by like diminished barriers to the means of production to some degree. It's less expensive and easier to make great looking special effects, and fantasy and magic and technology all require really good special effects to make the stories immersive and believable in a visual medium. So I think that that's helped over the past like 10, 15 years or so, maybe even longer than that. But I think that there's also just the appreciation for how the greater access and the greater ability we have for technology to obviously improve our lives, the more quickly we immediately realize what the trade-offs are and what the issues are. Because like immediately we all of a sudden have to deal with all of the downsides of technology. I almost mixed them up. And that actually forces us to be thinking about some of these considerations more on a daily basis. And in my opinion, magic always wins. But, you know, that's how I feel about things. But I'm curious, Jess, like you are, here's nerdies, everybody. What do you think about how this interacts with like sci-fi? Like, what's the relationship with this and sci-fi in general? Is there a thing there?
Yes, that is the question. I'm trying to avoid a lawnmower noise in the background, but that is my question. How is this different from science fiction?
Ooh.
So depending on who you talk to, the difference between fantasy and science fiction is trees and spaceships. like same sort of story arcs according to some people. In fact, like even the Hugo Awards is like an elite award, but can go to fantasy books or science fiction books. It's like the Hugo and the Nebula are sort of the elite sci-fi awards, but the Hugo is actually for fantasy and so like even among like the authors, it's just like, is it trees or is it spaceships? But like the story could be the same. But this question of why now, I think is some of what I've been sort of wondering about, because they're all being set largely in like Victorian England or equivalences, where it's like, you know, Shadow and Bone, you could argue is like, could be sort of like frontier US. Also, it has some similarities to that same moment of like industrialization on the frontier. But this idea of like going back and looking at the moment when technology was emerging and having massive impacts on society and placing magic in those moments and having this sort of like waging between, you know, like shooting guns versus shooting firebolts, I think is like this sort of like bigger question, especially in like the Irregulars and in the Nevers. They're both like, people are like sooty all the time, like looking. And some of my question is like, you know, we've been going through these moments where there's sort of like major privacy thing, you know, to one of my prognostications from last year about like are people going to turn on sort of like big tech more broadly, or like the tech industry. We're seeing like antitrust conversations. We saw, you know, Cambridge Analytica, you know, data leaks, like what impact is this having on our brain? Like all of these questions are sort of swirling, and we're going through this like major moment contending with climate change in sort of an increasingly more real and present way, which is largely, I think, being attributed with good reason to the Industrial Revolution. And so this question of like, should magic have won against the ills of technology? Like magic just becomes like a foil against technology. And I think the question, no one is watching these shows being like, well, you know, as wonderful as it would be to like wake up and suddenly realize you have superpowers, like that's no different than Marvel or some of the other superhero things. And why I think it's different in this case is because the real relevant thing is like, people are increasingly, I think, scared of and or contending with the impact that technology is like having on the world and society writ large. And so the way to deal with that is just to like fight it against magic in these contests as a way to explore it. But I don't know.
Well, I think maybe it's just because I have not seen these shows. So I don't have the context of like what about this technology feels particularly distinct. Like, is it a certain kind? Is it like privacy related, you know, fears, or like in what ways are these types of tech making you feel like it's a unique to the times kind of a thing?
Which of these shows, of like the four that I mentioned, Aaron, have you watched?
So I had a beer and watched Winx, or Fate, the Winx Saga, the first episode where I was lost in the most beautiful Irish accents. And I that actually made me understand, or it made me think, I guess, about whether these two things were both sort of in front of the viewer because narratively they wanted to be in conflict anyway, or if it was actually just because we're in a moment where discussing belief or playing with ideas of belief. There's never been an audience that has been so embroiled in questions of what is believable or not. These questions of truth and veracity and like, what does it mean? Like essentially the fabric of our own realities has been ripped wide open over the past decade. And I think more and more every day, these things that were once thought to be far flung are increasingly the status quo. And this thought that we have to live in this like like our daily lives we have to live in suspended disbelief. So we're still stuck in this moment of suspended disbelief as a culture. And so our daily lives are going to be like completely embroiled in questions of what's real or not. It makes sense that our fantasy escapism is going to in some ways have like, is going to tap into that, because that's just an easy way for viewers to enter a certain world. And to everything that you just said about these Victorian era moments and the Industrial Revolution is the other moment in history, one of the other moments in history in which that the edges of our reality got ripped wide open. So it kind of it's an interesting parallel and an interesting space to be able to help people relate with these narratives.
Yeah, I mean, to respond to what you said and be able to answer Jess's question as well is like the point you made about status quo, I think is really interesting, because these shows are doing a lot. Like to say that it's only magic versus technology is like such a gross reduction. The status quo point, I think, is a really important one, because if you look at The Nevers, for example, which is on HBO, if anyone wants to watch it, I've enjoyed it. It is sort of this question of magic versus technology, at least in the way I'm interpreting it. But through the lens of sort of like, what is our relationship with the patriarchy, right? Like the women in the show are the main characters, and largely women were, in quote, touched, getting these sort of powers when this alien came through Victorian England. And they're sort of contending with like, how should society respond to people who are different? How should we contend with like pollution and, what sort of forms of capitalism and all of these other things are being sort of pushed down by like monastic or aristocratic like men in Victorian England, which is really interesting, right? Because I think that's part of the moment when you think about climate change and broader social change that we're dealing with right now. This idea of like, whether if we reduce it to something like okay boomer, right? Like younger generations are dealing with this idea of like, we've inherited a lot of problems on a social level, on a societal level, on an environmental level, all of these things. And so that status quo of using like someone who gains magical powers to like push them as a contrast of having a different opinion or a different way of seeing how things should move forward in society, and like technology being sort of this, like Western white male driven sort of force in society, can also be vilified in that way, right?
It can be. I do wonder. Jess has a thought face, and and listeners can't see her thought face, and I have to call it out. Is there a thought, or should I? What do you think?
I'm sorry. I was just like, as you were describing that, I was like, Pocahontas. And then I was like, wait a minute, Avatar, which tried to be a better Pocahontas but failed. And then I was like, is this the third Pocahontas?
I think this might be like the 15th Pocahontas. I don't know. Like, I agree with you. And I actually was kind of gonna go there, which is that from a social perspective, mass media, and I mean all mass media, like news, or not news, but series, film, books, like anything that's narrative, has really loved being able to use power, like physical power and magical powers, as a way to empower marginalized audiences. That's the whole X-Men everything and all that.
Right.
But what's interesting too, or what I find really interesting too, is that not only does it stretch across media forms, but there are some media forms where they really do look at the intersection of those two things, where like you can use technology as power just like you can use the ability to like make fire happen as power. And I guess it's been about a year, so I have to bring up Horizon Zero Dawn again, which is like my favorite. But I do think that there's something about the fact, and there's something very important and central to these stories, where they're usually centering really strong female leads. So whether it's Naomi Alderman's book, The Power, or it's The Nevers, or it's Horizon Zero Dawn, or it's Returnal, which just came out on PS5, all these are not necessarily, like, some of them are falling more in the technology space, the alien space, the magic space. They lean into all of those to different degrees, but they're all allowing space for this conversation about whose power, what does it mean when those who have power, when those who don't have power in our daily lives realize they have as much power as they always have. And society has to react to that. And that's the sort of speculative, I would like that to be the speculative truth that we spend more time thinking about, let alone the speculative fiction.
Yeah. It's a perfect foil, right?
It is.
But what I think is interesting about this, like even the original question you brought to us, Joey, was like, who's winning? Or like why this now? And it sounds to me like, I'm glad Aaron even brought up like the strong female lead thing. Like we've talked about the waves of feminism on this show, and like I am not lying when I'm like the waves of Pocahontas sound like the thing we're talking about. And if the waves of Pocahontas are the thing that mean like magic versus technology, or like this contrast of whether it's like spiritual or like something versus like the harsh Western technological data, everything negative. Like, I guess what is different this time to you, or that feels like progress is being made, if any?
Well, because Joey is muted, I will give him a second to go on unmute. Look at that.
Well, I was gonna say because in the Pocahontas story, we know Pocahontas lost, right or wrong, right? Probably most of us would agree, like wrongly, that Pocahontas lost to the sort of conquering empire. But in these stories, because it's a speculative device versus like a historical fiction or historical adaptation, there's like this opportunity of empowering people to push back against these forces in like a slightly more, because it's not real in history, it gives you like this potential opportunity to push this type of thinking into the future, as opposed to like the story was already written and we're just telling you a story in which we know at the end like Pocahontas didn't win. And so I think this idea of why now is like people are looking for change, and magic becomes a device that you don't need to explain in the way that we do with science, that you can have like this sort of innate force to enact a change that doesn't have to be described away, that it can be sort of like a thing that exists inside of you, or is otherworldly, or is spiritual, or is like exists in some other quanta that can allow you to push a change into society. And technology in that same way, like if you have this innate ability and that is magic, technology is this like firm structure of social constructs and all of that. And so that like idea of like softness pushing against hardness also, I think, is kind of like a masculine versus like feminine construct, and magic winning in these moments of like the idea of like pushing back against whether it's the patriarchy or sort of like masculine ideas within society is also kind of nice, right? Like that winning doesn't need to be zero sum or hard or like forceful. It is also like a nice idea to have in a story. And even what you were saying too, like Raya, the new Disney movie, is also this sort of idea of like a strong female lead and like the winning attitude, even when like the bad girl in the movie is a woman, but the ideas that she's like presenting are about like fighting and taking and all of that. And Raya is presenting these ideas of like kindness and sharing and cooperation, is like in that same way, like presenting another story of like a different way that you can move forward and sort of a philosophical worldview.
This also could be like the I don't know, technological outcroppings of postmodernism and all that, where it's just like we're able to watch so much more content now than previous generations were, that we can see very obviously just the like recent gaps or holes and lack of empathy or complete empathy that a lot of these stories have tried to do. And so I feel like there is like a generational mea culpa. Like people are trying to fix the sins of the 90s. And I don't say this just because I've been binge watching Baywatch again. I cannot tell you why. I don't know why. I've literally,
why?
Nope, it's been...
What are you doing?
I don't know what's happening. It's been very, very interesting and disturbing. But
it's the most absurd show. It is. Beach lifeguard crew gets an entire television show.
You guys, there's an episode where they go to a haunted hotel called the Hotel Coronado, and one of their rooms is haunted, and yet there is still like, I don't know, a oil rig that is falling at sea, and they have to go like, it is so outlandish in 45-minute increments. But the reason I bring that up too is because I think WandaVision took advantage of this. WandaVision did a great job of actually, when they showed decade to decade, they sort of show you exactly how distant each of those conversations around a lot of these things were. And of course, they were putting like magic and technology side by side, because you've got Wanda, and also it's like really magic, because even in the MCU, we're usually talking about powers in a like genetic sense, not spiritual powers that come from like witchcraft. And so you've got witchcraft against technology and creating the bubble that I'm going to stop talking before I go into spoiler territory. But I do, but the hex. But I think specifically when you look at their homages to the later decades, you also can see very clearly in their conversations about like Full House and Malcolm in the Middle, using both of those as homages. You can see where like, oh yeah, it wasn't that long ago, and it's been wrong. It's been very wrong. It's gonna still be wrong. When we look at stuff made in this decade, 2 decades from now, Cringe Fest is still gonna be just the same. And maybe, who knows, maybe some of these magic and technology debates are a little bit more durable. Like they are maybe they stand the test of time a little bit longer and are a little bit more inviting to have some of those sorts of conversations.
Yeah, and maybe to your point, like the idea of confronting the ills when put through the lens of magic makes it a little bit less like a mirror that you're holding up. So you can still see the ill, but it's not like, hey, it's your face that you're looking back at. Because that part's hard, right? Like doing the work and confronting issues in society often means that like, depending on which issue it is, like you may be in some way part of that conversation. And so like, if it's about magic, then it's like, well, it's not me. I don't have magic, but that's like a good point, and maybe I should think about that. And so it just sort of like softens the blow a little bit.
And it's like the rate limiting factor of the politics of empathy. Like that dissociative device allows you to say like, yeah, sure. Like, oh, I can identify with that, but I don't have to do anything with it. Okay, bye. And like we keep on doing that with media over and over again because it feels so good in the moment. It feels so good as to why it gets created, but it takes a whole lot longer for the impact to actually swell beyond the celluloid.
Mm-hmm. So this brings us to Jess's Magic the Gathering corner.
I've
Wrap
played
up
Magic
corner.
the Gathering.
So good.
It's a fun game. You really have to know a lot of cards, though.
Mm-hmm.
We are seemingly experiencing a new frontier of magic and tech television, which is, though not unique in the whole timeline of science fiction entertainment, new, but it is a new device to explore some more serious stuff going on culturally, societally, without it being really scary or intimidating. It can still be some form of entertainment, and we love it. And especially by we, I mean Joey, because Joey has watched all of these shows. And so now, maybe you should go watch one. Joey, if you had to only recommend one, what would it be? Go. Is it Fate, the Winx Saga?
No, that one was like enjoyable, but kind of trash.
That sounds about right.
I think Shadow and Bone was probably like the best one, and then Nevers is probably close second.
Okay.
Both are good.
I will throw in a recommendation. Of course, it's going to be gaming related. Final Fantasy VII, the remake in particular. They're releasing the remaster on PS5 like next week, I think. But that is absolutely, that whole series has a fantastic technology versus magic issue at its center. And it's like all about climate change. It's everything that we've just been talking about. Tifa is a very strong female lead. Treated poorly, but she's amazing. Yeah.
And if you have teenagers in your life, Legend of Korra tackles a lot of issues. Racism, sexism, imperialism, capitalism. I was like, when I watched it for the first time recently, I was like, dang, this is covering a lot of ground. And done well.
Love it.
Yeah. Well, we'll save that for another day.
How dare you?
I purposefully withheld telling you about this because I really just want to hear your reactions and see how you feel about this whole thing.
I'm so excited.
Because I don't know about y'all, but I personally have been listening to far fewer podcasts since I lost my commute, which is the time that I reserved for podcasting. But the other day, I took a walk and I was going through, some like reaching for some random podcast, just something different, and came across a archived run from Gastropod, the food and science podcast. That was their episode on ghost foods. And I know y'all haven't heard of this before because you were like, what is that? And I had no idea what it was either. But of course, reading this episode intro, I was intrigued. And you're going to have to listen to the whole thing because it is really interesting. But for sum up, it's the idea of foods that went extinct and so we'll never taste them. But there's a lot of information on them. For instance, in the Roman times, they used this herb called silphium that was like more common than like salt and pepper. Like you put silphium on everything, like a roast chicken, like on your fruit. Like I don't even know. You put it everywhere. It even made it onto their gold coins. Like that was like the thing that represented the time. And then it went extinct and no one knows what it tastes like, which is the craziest thing. And the author of the book who they featured on the show, Lenore Newman, wrote this whole book and is talking about like this as an exploration of, it's a kind of like a mix of archaeology and culinary history and science. But one of the things that she said that scared the bejesus out of me was like the three things that I am most afraid for in the future are, get this, coffee, chocolate, and wait for it, vanilla.
No, Jess.
I know. And so I am here with you today to, of course, talk about ghost foods, but also to ask you, what's your worst possible ghost food?
Whoa. Oh, this is really hard. It's because, like, from the description, it sounds like it's got to be an ingredient. So, like, the ghost food is likely not. It can be like pizza. That's on my mac and cheese. Like, I've got like
pizza.
Broader.
Pizza was right there.
Yeah, basically anything that has meat, cheese, and carbs in some combo. That's what I mean. Does that count?
What's interesting is pizza is also a ghost food for me because it haunts me for days and anyone in my relatively near proximity.
This is true. Well, isn't that interesting? There are people that live with ghost foods all the time. I'll tell you what, my husband's never having ricotta ever again. That's been one that's, so
That's true.
I'll tell you what.
I'll tell you what.
You just
I don't know.
into I'll tell you what, man, eat like a old man from like Rhode Island or something.
That's my southeastern Ohio. That's it's a part of me. It will never go away. Yeah. But can you miss? I mean, like it is the like divorcing of yourself from the food that's the big thing because we can't we're sad about silphium, but we don't know what we're missing.
We have no idea. But what's crazy is some of the backstory that they share is that, for instance, silphium went away because the demand was so high. People loved it so much, they ate it to extinction. And so the concept of like, what is something?
Jeez.
Yeah, right? Isn't that crazy? So it's like, there are things I'm sure that we've become quite used to, but like vanilla, for instance, I know how hard it is to make. It is entirely plausible to imagine it being eaten past the point supply could provide.
There's like an interesting part of me that's like the seed bank in Norway or Sweden, where I'm like, because chocolate and coffee are two where I'd be like, oh shit, like, what do I do now? Like, those are two like joys I have left because I have all of like the allergic or lactose related ghost foods in my life currently.
So sad.
And so like coffee and chocolate are like still hanging on like two areas of joy in my life. But I'm like, well, you can do like factory or like, like modern agriculture, like indoor hydroponic agriculture. If they have the seeds in that like Norwegian seed bank, then we'll be fine. But I don't know. This like your point, Aaron, of like some of us are living with ghost foods in our life now. Like apples, like was a tough loss for me. Like that was when I couldn't eat apples anymore. I was like, and my daughter tries to feed me apples all the time, and I'm like, Dad, I can't eat that because his mouth gets itchy and it feels like the middle of his skull is like unscratchable, which he doesn't get for some reason. I don't know why.
I mean, like, I think that my closest thing, I don't have any personal food allergies, or significant ones, but I am mildly allergic to kiwi. And it took me a long time to get over a really common allergy, which is New York apples in particular. There are a lot of people who have like foodborne allergies that come from the type of pollen that bees will pollinate in certain regions that when people move to them, they just grew up in a different place and it's like their body's not used to it. And it's like, great, someone please take sandpaper and rub my uvula with it, because that's what it tastes like when I eat a kiwi. And so still to this day, it's like soy, kiwi, and apples. I have like, if it's in there, I can deal with it. It's not too bad, but I've never had to go without
We're in the same team, Aaron. You may at some point come fully into my nightmare.
Don't wish that upon him.
I am just a couple years away from my fourth decade. I'm going to be right there with you really soon, I'm sure.
Yeah, the uvula exfoliation allergy cluster.
Yes.
See, but there's a difference still to me between you can't have it anymore versus no one can have it anymore.
Right. And I think that it would be better if no one could have it, right? Like if no one, I'm sorry, but actually maybe silphium is a good example. Because like if chocolate went extinct today and we did it, whoops, you still have like the Willy Wonkas of the world. And like, it's I don't know what we did.
We ate it all, sorry.
My peanut butter's in my nothing. Reese's, it's all Reese's fault. So that was really 70s marketing joke. It's a really good one. But like all those things, we have so many like cultural artifacts that are built around it from like modern and many, many years gone past times, like thinking about Quetzalcoatl and like Mayan gods of chocolate and things like that. We just wouldn't understand. But like silphium, we see it on the coins, but we're like, like maybe
see it on the coins.
on the Roman currency, I suppose would be more specific. So we see it on the coins.
All around.
Yeah.
There's just an M&M on the U.S. monetary notes.
We lost our beloved M.
We lost chocolate, but never forgotten. I just sent you guys a link because my orientation towards technology is like, are we at a point where if we don't destroy ourselves, we may not have any more ghost foods? this is like Dogfish Head Brewery has had these ancient ales collection that they've done where they're like using archaeologists and advanced like technology to identify the recipes of these like inside like clay urns and stuff from They have one that's called the Midas Touch, which was found inside like some object that belonged to King Midas in his tomb. There's one that's called Chateau Jahu, probably pronounced that wrong, but it's like the oldest known fermented beverage in history from like 9,000 BCE or something like that. Thiambra is one that was like using looks like a Native American culture in Missouri. And so there's like a bunch of these things where they're using technology to like ghost these foods to sort of Lazarus these foods back into the world.
Yeah, this is one of the things that also is so interesting, and I can't believe that, like, I've heard of Dogfish Head before, so it's wild that they have this. But I guess like because like what's it called? It's like the grave robbers who would like break in and take
Tomb Raiders.
Thank you. That's right. Who would take stuff would not be looking for like seeds or a bottle of gross old liquid, right? Like they'll take the shiny stuff. And so I think there's definitely a bunch of people interested in this field of like, can we resurrect certain things that never were that we don't know but could become a thing. And we're
just go into the intestines of some ancient Roman in a tomb that just ate all of this stuff.
Scrape it out of
just
there.
An ancient colonic for some silica seeds. What is it called?
Silphium. Yeah. Silphium. I mean, doesn't this like what's the movie script for the Jurassic Park Silphium story? You know, like there's something there. Does like the silphium just like turn into like the blob and eat everybody?
No.
Or is it like a powdered wave that ends up swarming like locusts? Yeah, it's basically just Gilbert Gottfried talking to
people. We ate it all because it was a murderous herb. We ate it all so it wouldn't eat us.
This is so good. This is so good. We stopped this from happening and you brought it back. How dare you guys? We got to get writing. I'm in LA.
Then they have to resurrect one of the ancient Romans and bring them back to life to fight the silphium.
Duh, he's the Rock, even though it's a completely different society. He comes back as the Scorpion King from The Mummy Returns. I'm just saying this is writing itself.
Works.
This is writing itself.
It works.
Yes. Guys,
no notes.
We did it.
No notes.
No notes. Green light that.
So this brings us to Jess's Ghost Corner.
Ooh.
It's just you at a pottery wheel.
Yeah. Oh my love. Yes. I mean, you gotta have the Unchained Melody. It's essential.
Yeah. Do you think Ryan would do a ghost reenactment with you for the sake of the show notes? It's for the show notes. Do it for the show.
Some foods have gone extinct, which is really sad, and there are certain foods today that are on the precipice. Some people might as well believe that those foods have already left us. For instance, present company and apples, because they aren't able to experience them, but there is a whole new level when no one is able to experience them. However, there is hope because upon further look, beer and seeds might indicate there's a chance that certain foods that we've never tasted could also return to us for experiencing in the modern times. That's something. Ghost jokes.
Is it glass half full to be like, I'm good not trying silphium because it probably tasted like trash because they were like, what were they eating? They were eating like rotten grain and whatever. And they're like, these herbs are delicious. It's like, comparably, like you bring back one of these like ancient ales and you're like, the modern ones are better. Like this is not very good.
Actually, there is another excellent story that they tell on this show that isn't just about silphium, which maybe could have been garbage, but it was about a competition to create the ultimate pear. And they did it. Like they made the ultimate pear for this king, and the king was like, wow, this is the bomb, like the best pear ever created. But because it didn't travel well, because it was so like buttery soft, no grit at all, it's not the one that became popularized. And so even though it was the ultimate version of the pear, it didn't make it. And so I wonder, not to say that silphium was the ultimate herb, but we have definitely lost things to history that were awesome because something else proved superior for another reason.
This brings us back to the banana conversation from the live show, because we're about to lose another banana soon, probably. And we're going to have a new banana, and we don't know what the Big Mike, the Grand Michel, Gros Michel tastes like. And our kids may not know what the current banana tastes like.
Whoa.
Wow, wow,
Here we are.
Wow. Here we are.
That's the epilogue.
I'm a banana.
My spoon is too big.
My spoon is too big.
I don't understand.
Credits.
Mm-hmm.
Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain production.
Recorded in the procedurally generated studio in your mind's roguelike game. Thanks.
With Jennifer Lopez and Vincent D'Onofrio. As always, we'd like to thank executive producer and Vincent D'Onofrio backup dancer, Jess Vander.
We'd also like to thank the rest of the people that are apparently in the cell. Namely, sound engineer Alex Contel.
We'd like to thank designer Nora Mestrich for being trapped inside a prison inside my mind and designing everything beautifully.
Skill. And then the production crew that, like us, dots our desert landscape of sonic excellence with trees that reach toward the sky like hands seeking solace. Sorry, Gilbert, Les Jacobs, and Tony Vong. Thank you.
And as always, sorry, Elon.
Oh, God, sorry.
Special thanks.
Special thanks, The Cell. Like, just to be really, really clear about how that went off the rails. Thank you, The Cell. It's a fantastically terrifying movie. It's a lot.
Also,
Jennifer Lopez.
Louise Bourgeois' Cells Found Art and Object series, which is also a very terrifying artistic expression.
Oh, yes, Louise Bourgeois.
Eyeballs on my palms. That's where I go. That's my version. Guillermo del Toro and Pan's Labyrinth. That's everything in my mind is always that. I do have to thank Returnal, which is on PS5. It is this game that is just like, it's impossibly hard. I don't know why I still play it. It's the hardest thing I've ever played. But the health potion that you get to restore all of your health throughout the game is silphium. And I did not know what that was until this episode. So thank you, Jess. Amazing. Amazing.
I would like to thank the hours of science videos and sci-fi that I consumed for my enjoyment of Tenet, because I really liked it and I got it, I think, just because I've watched so many stupid videos on YouTube, and I was like talking to Becky while we were watching it, and I was like, so this is what's happening, they're actually moving backwards across, and so the fight's happening in two directions, and she's like, I don't care, they're just like punchy kicky, it's cool.
Yes.
Like I don't need to get it. It's fine. I'm enjoying it. And I'm like, no, this is like a really cool construct. No, so like what's happening is like they're fighting. And she's like, no, we're good. We are good. I don't need it.
You know what? To marry a lowbrow with your highbrow, I go back to thanking Baywatch just for juxtaposition's sake. I can't tell you how bad that show is. Like, legitimately, when you look at like the show and you hear the creators talking about it, you get how the world before the internet would make this thing happen. Because it's like, it's the first season is like the best of not Sweet Valley High, 90210, different 90s show. It's like a little bit of 90210, a little bit of MTV, and then a little bit of Unsolved Mysteries, all thrown on a beach in LA. And that's just it. And it doesn't make any sense, but you're like, I don't have an internet, so sure. Like, this kind of does it all. Cool.
I can't just go on Instagram and look at pretty people, so I'll just watch them on reruns on the WB.
Yes, and the music. The music. There is no audio time capsule worse than the sounds of Baywatch. It is the cheapest Casio keyboard ever being played behind someone's back without looking at the keys. That's basically what it is. It's so thanks Baywatch. Thank you Hulu for putting it on there.
La Femme Nikita.
Ooh, thank you Silk Stockings. Yeah, there's a whole
Thank you, USA, for your wonderful contribution to the time capsule of American cinema.
It's so true. And you know what?
Well,
Alex, Joey, Jess, thanks y'all. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Ciao. Some people stand in the darkness. I'm pausing for a second because I'm checking on Jess.
There was a very large, inexplicable plume of cigarette smoke that entered into this room through the other window. And it was so oppressive that I needed to open the window, but then I forgot I had my headphones in, so I dragged my computer with my ears, which is why I made that face of like, oh. And then I had to open the window, but one of the things was locked, and so I'm sorry. This whole thing was me being melodramatic.
Got it.